The gavel hit the wooden block with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom. "This concludes the reading of the will," the lawyer said, sliding the papers back into a neat folder. My daughter Emily leaned back in her chair with that satisfied little smirk she'd inherited from her mother. She didn't even try to hide it. She thought she'd won. All around the polished oak table, my late sister's possessions had just been divided. Her lake house in Vermont, gone. Emily's name on the deed now. The jewelry, the antique collection, the trust fund, every last piece was sliding right into my daughter's hands. I got nothing, not even a mention. The other relatives shuffled out, whispering behind their hands. I sat there, my fingers pressed against the cool leather of my chair, staring at the will like it was written in some foreign language. It wasn't the lack of money that stunned me. It was the message. Emily had maneuvered this. I could feel it. It had been weeks since my sister passed, but the grief was still a raw scrape inside me. We'd grown up in that Vermont lake house together, skating on the frozen water in the winter, painting the porch in the summer, eating blueberry pancakes in the kitchen that always smelled faintly of cedar, and now it was gone. I caught Emily's eye as she stood, smoothing down her tailored navy dress. "It's nothing personal, Dad," she said with mock sympathy, gathering the signed documents into her designer tote. "Nothing personal." My voice was low, even. "You just took the home where I grew up." "You weren't really using it," she said, shrugging, like this was all perfectly reasonable. "I have plans for it." Plans. I didn't need to ask what that meant. The way she'd been circling around the family assets for years, waiting for the right moment to pounce. This was no accident. The lawyer avoided my eyes, probably afraid of being caught in the fallout. But I didn't yell. I didn't storm out. I simply stood, collected my old wool coat from the back of the chair, and walked toward the exit. Emily thought this was over. She thought she had stripped me bare. What she didn't know was that my sister and I had shared more than just summers at the lake. There were documents she'd never seen, conversations she could never imagine. She didn't know about the one thing that had never been written into that, well, the thing that was still in my hands. As I stepped into the cold November air, a light snow began to fall, soft flakes clinging to my coat sleeve. My breath curled in front of me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt steady. She thought she'd taken everything. She hadn't even seen what I had planned. Emily wasn't always like this. There was a time, before the sharp suits and the endless phone calls, when she'd curl up next to me on the old leather couch with a blanket, her hair smelling faintly of strawberries, and ask me to tell her stories about the old days. She used to love hearing about how her Aunt Claire and I would sneak down to the lake at midnight, the moonlight shimmering over the water, daring each other to swim in the freezing cold. When Emily was little, Claire was her second mother. Summers at the lake house meant pancakes in the morning, fishing in the afternoon, and board games by the fire at night. It was the place where Emily learned to ride a bike, to swim, to roast marshmallows until they caught fire. I thought those memories would mean something to her. But somewhere along the way, maybe during her years at that private business school, those memories turned into numbers. The lake house wasn't a place anymore. It was an asset. The antique jewelry wasn't a gift from our grandmother. It was an investment portfolio. The first sign should have been the call I got 3 weeks after Claire's funeral. Emily's voice was crisp, professional. "Dad, I think we should talk about the estate before it gets messy." Messy. My sister had just been buried, and Emily was already thinking about property transfers and legal claims. I told myself it was just her way of coping. After all, she'd always been practical. But as the weeks passed, I noticed how she'd started meeting with Claire's attorney, without inviting me, how she'd volunteered to go through the paperwork at Claire's house, insisting it would be easier if she handled it. And then there was the way she stopped answering my casual questions about the will. "Oh, nothing's been decided yet, Dad." Lies. Smooth, rehearsed lies. I should have stepped in earlier, but I was drowning in my own grief. Claire and I had been the last two left from our immediate family. Losing her felt like losing the only person who still remembered the details of my childhood. The way our father whistled when he came in from work. The way our mother used to keep peppermint candies in the kitchen drawer. The silly song we made up when we were kids to annoy our neighbors. Without her, I felt untethered. And Emily knew it. She used my silence like a crowbar, prying open every legal gap she could find. When I finally realized what she'd done, transferring titles, rerouting assets, making sure my name disappeared from anything of value, it was too late. On paper, I had nothing. That night, I sat in my living room with a cup of black coffee gone cold, staring at the envelope from Claire's lawyer. Inside was a polite, printed notice. As per the terms of the will, All assets have been allocated. No signature from me was required. No acknowledgement. Just a clean sweep. I kept thinking about the last conversation I'd had with Claire, a week before she went into the hospital. We'd been sitting on the porch of the lake house, the autumn leaves tumbling down in gold and red, and she'd reached over to squeeze my hand. "Don't let them push you out, Sam," she'd said. I laughed, thinking she meant the cousins who were always trying to get more summer weeks at the house. "Push me out of what?" "You'll know," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on the water. "When the time comes, you'll know." At the time, I didn't understand. Now I did. The betrayal burned, but underneath it was something else. Something steadier, colder. The kind of resolve that comes from decades of working with your hands, fixing what's broken, and outlasting storms. Emily thought she'd cornered me, but what she didn't know was that Claire and I had planned for this a long time ago. There were things no will could touch, things hidden in plain sight. And while Emily was busy counting her new fortune, I was already counting down the days until she discovered that she'd inherited far more than she bargained for. 3 days after the will reading, Emily called me. Not to check in, not to see how I was holding up. "Dad," she began, her tone clipped, "I'm going to need you to clear out your things from the lake house by next weekend." I was in the middle of making coffee. My hand froze on the kettle. "Excuse me?" "I'm renovating," she said like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "New kitchen, new floors, maybe tear down the back porch. I've already spoken to a contractor. It's better if your stuff isn't in the way." Renovating. The word scraped against my throat. That porch was the one Claire and I had built the summer of '85. The one where Emily had taken her first steps. "Emily, that house has been in our family for—" "I know," she cut in sharply, "but sentiment doesn't increase property value. I'm planning to rent it out for the season. I've run the numbers. It'll pay for itself in 2 years." Rent it out, like it was just another income stream. I felt my jaw tighten. "That porch was your aunt's favorite spot in the world. She used to—" "Dad," her voice sharpened to a point. "You don't own it, I do, and I'm asking you to respect that." For a moment, all I could hear was the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint drip of the coffee maker. My chest felt heavy, not just with anger, but with something colder. "Fine," I said finally. "I'll have it cleared out." "Good," she replied, already distracted. "And one more thing, if you could take the old fishing boat out of the shed. That'd be great. It's an eyesore." The boat, my boat, the one Claire had helped me restore, plank by plank, during those endless summer evenings. The one with the hidden compartment under the bench seat, a compartment Emily had never known about. That's when it clicked. I'd been patient, I'd been quiet. But there, in that moment, listening to my daughter reduce our history to an eyesore, I realized Claire had been right. The time had come. I ended the call without another word. The coffee sat untouched on the counter as I walked to my desk and pulled out the small battered key that had been sitting in my drawer for years. It fit perfectly into the lock on the old cedar box I kept at the back of the closet. Inside were the papers Claire and I had signed together. Deeds, agreements, and one particularly important document she'd insisted on drawing up before her health began to fail. A document that Emily had no idea even existed. I ran my fingers over Claire's handwriting in the margins. Her little notes to me. "Just in case, love, C." Emily thought she had the upper hand, but she'd made one critical mistake. She'd forgotten that her father had been playing this game a lot longer than she had. By the time she realized what I was about to do, it would be far too late. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the cedar box open in front of me. The documents lay there like loaded weapons, neatly folded, perfectly legal, and carrying the kind of weight that could change everything in an instant. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt tired. The rain tapped against the window in a slow, steady rhythm, the kind that makes you want to stay put, to let the storm pass without moving a muscle. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I kept sipping from it, as if the bitterness could keep me sharp. Claire's voice kept coming back to me. "Don't let them push you out." She'd said it like a warning, but also like a plea. She knew Emily's ambition better than I'd ever admitted to myself. And now here I was, holding the exact tools I'd need to undo my daughter's victory. But undoing it meant war. I imagined Emily's face if she found out. The betrayal she'd feel, not because of what she'd done to me, but because she'd believe I had no right to fight back. The way she might spin it to the rest of the family, painting herself as the victim, me as the stubborn old man who couldn't let go. Was I ready for that? The documents weren't just paper, they were dynamite. One phone call to the right person, and everything she'd taken would be tied up in legal knots she couldn't cut through. The renovations would stop, the rental plans would vanish, and the lake house would never be hers in the way she imagined. But there was a part of me, a stubborn sentimental part, that wondered if there was still a way to reach her without destroying what little was left between us. Maybe she could be reasoned with. Maybe if I explained what that place meant, she'd see past the dollar signs. Then I remembered her voice on the phone earlier. Sentiment doesn't increase property value. No, this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a takeover, and the only language Emily understood now was leverage. I closed the cedar box and rested both hands on the lid. The rain outside had turned to sleet, rattling against the glass. My reflection stared back at me in the darkened window, older, warier, but not beaten. Maybe there was still time to change my mind. Maybe I could let her have it all, keep my peace, avoid the fight. But as I sat there, the memory of Claire's hand squeezing mine came back sharp and clear. You'll know when the time comes. I knew, and I couldn't walk away. Have you ever watched someone take something from you, not because they needed it, but because they could, and realized they were daring you to stop them? That's exactly where I was. Emily thought the fight was over. She thought the papers were signed, the house was hers, and I was just an old man nursing hurt feelings. But here's the thing. Sometimes the quietest people are the ones planning the loudest comebacks. If you've ever been in that position, if someone has underestimated you so completely, they might want to be careful, because when you've got nothing left to lose, you've got nothing left to fear. And I wasn't afraid of my daughter. Not anymore. The next morning, I woke before the sun. Not because I couldn't sleep, though I hadn't, but because I needed the cover of darkness for what I was about to do. The cedar box sat on the passenger seat of my truck, a silent companion on the drive north. The road to the lake house wound through stretches of pine forest, the mist curling low over the asphalt. I kept the headlights dim, more out of habit than necessity. Emily was still in the city. I was sure of it. Her kind of renovation planning happened in conference rooms, not on construction sites. That gave me time. When I reached the long gravel driveway, I stopped short of the main gate. My boots crunched against the frost as I walked the last 100 yards, the cold air sharp in my lungs. There it was, the porch Claire and I had built, the one Emily called dated. The fishing boat sat in the shed, its green paint faded but still solid. I unlocked the shed and stepped inside. The smell of old wood and engine oil wrapped around me like a familiar coat. I ran my hand along the boat's edge, feeling the grooves and scratches that told a story only I remembered. The hidden compartment was still there under the bench seat. My fingers found the latch without looking. It opened with a soft click, revealing a bundle of waterproof envelopes, each marked in Claire's handwriting. Property transfer agreements, letters, photographs, and the gem of them all, a deed of life estate, signed and notarized, giving me full rights to occupy the lake house until my death, regardless of ownership changes. Emily might own it on paper, but she couldn't touch it while I was alive, and she had no idea. I took the documents out carefully, tucking them into a metal case I'd brought for this very purpose. If Emily ever thought about selling the property, these papers would stop her cold. No buyer would take a house with a lifetime occupant they couldn't remove. Standing there, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about keeping the house. It was about reminding Emily that history isn't something you erase with a renovation. By the time I locked the shed again, the first light of dawn was brushing the lake. The water was still, like a mirror, and for a second I saw Claire's reflection beside mine. I almost heard her say, "Good, now finish it." On the drive back, I stopped at a diner off Route 12. The waitress, a woman with silver hair and tired eyes, poured my coffee and asked if I was heading up to the lake for the winter prep. "Something like that," I said, smiling faintly. While I ate, I spread the documents out on the booth table, triple-checking each signature and date. The legal terms were airtight. Claire had made sure of that. All I had to do now was make them official with the county records office. But part of me wanted to wait. Not long, just enough to let Emily move forward with her plans. Enough for her to invest time, money, and pride into the house before I pulled the rug out from under her. It wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about impact. The more she underestimated me, the more satisfying the moment would be when she realized she hadn't been holding all the cards. As I finished my coffee, I could almost picture her face smug, turning to confused, confused turning to furious. And then finally the moment she understood I'd been 2 steps ahead the whole time. 2 days later, Emily called again. "Dad, I've scheduled the demolition for next month," she said brightly, as if she were announcing a vacation. "The contractor says we can start on the porch and maybe knock down that ugly shed." The shed. My shed. I bit back the smile that threatened to give me away. "That's ambitious," I said slowly. "It's going to be amazing," she went on. "Once it's all open plan and modernized, we can rent to high-end vacationers. I've already got a designer coming to look at the kitchen." She kept talking, her voice brimming with the kind of confidence that comes from believing you've already won. I made the appropriate noises, sounds great, while my mind was miles ahead, mapping the final steps. The next morning, I drove into town and parked across from the county courthouse. The building was a solid block of red brick, its white columns dusted with frost. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and old varnish. I headed straight to the recorder's office. The clerk, a man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses, glanced up from his desk. "Morning. What can I help you with?" "I'd like to record a life estate deed," I said, sliding the papers across the counter. He examined them carefully, flipping through each page, his eyes narrowing slightly at the signatures. "These are unusual," he said finally. "They're binding," I replied. "Drawn up by an attorney and notarized. Everything's in order." He nodded slowly. "Yes, they are. Once I file this, it becomes part of the public record. No sale or transfer without honoring the life estate." That's the idea. By the time I left the courthouse, the deed was officially recorded. It felt like sliding the final piece into a puzzle, a quiet click that locked everything into place. Now, it was just a matter of waiting. That evening, I stopped by the lake house again, timing my visit for just before sunset. The golden light poured across the water, setting the porch aglow. I stood there for a long moment, letting the silence sink in. Every board, every nail, every chipped bit of paint was part of a history Emily didn't value, but I did. I placed a small envelope on the kitchen counter right where she'd see it the next time she came by. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a certified copy of the recorded deed. No note, no explanation, just the cold legal truth of it. On the drive home, I imagined the moment she would find it. She'd read it once, not fully understanding. Then again, slower, the meaning sinking in. She'd check the dates, the signatures, the seal, and then she'd realize all her plans, every blueprint, every contractor meeting, every rental estimate meant nothing without my consent. The phone rang later that night, Emily's number flashing across the screen. I let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. 2 hours later, she texted, "We need to talk. Call me." I didn't. Not yet. Because this wasn't just about blocking her. This was about letting her feel the weight of her mistake. The more time she had to sit with the realization, the deeper the lesson would sink. And I had all the time in the world. The knock came the next morning. Sharp, fast, impatient. I didn't have to check the peephole. I knew it was her. When I opened the door, Emily stood there in a tailored coat, her hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. She was holding the envelope I'd left in the lake house kitchen, her grip white-knuckled. "What is this?" she demanded, thrusting it toward me. "You can read," I said evenly. Her eyes narrowed. "A life estate deed? Dated 3 years ago? You've been sitting on this the whole time?" I stepped aside and gestured for her to come in. She didn't move. "This isn't fair," she continued. "I own that house. You can't just plant yourself there forever and block everything I've planned." I almost laughed at the irony. "Funny, Emily. That's exactly what you did to me." She blinked, taken aback. "This is different." "No, it's exactly the same," I said, my voice steady. "You used the will to push me out. Claire and I used the law to keep me in. The difference is, I did it without lying or manipulating anyone." Her jaw clenched. "You could have told me. And you could have told me you were maneuvering to take everything before the funeral," I shot back. "But you didn't. You waited until you thought I couldn't fight back." The silence between us was thick. Outside, the wind rattled the bare branches against the siding. Finally, she tried a different angle. "Dad, look, we can still make this work. Maybe we split the rental income, or you let me do the renovations. And—" "No," I interrupted. "You didn't want to share when you thought you had it all. You don't get to bargain now." Her face flushed, and I could see the realization dawning. This wasn't a bluff. I wasn't angry in the heat of the moment. I was resolute. "This isn't over," she said finally, her voice low. "It is for me," I replied, stepping back and closing the door. I stood there for a moment, hand on the knob, listening to the sound of her heels clicking away on the porch. It was the sound of a battle line being drawn, and I knew there was no going back. 3 days passed without a word from Emily. I expected silence. Anger takes time to boil down into strategy. But on the fourth evening, my phone buzzed. Her name lit up the screen. I answered, half out of curiosity. Emily. Her tone was soft, almost hesitant. Dad, I've been thinking. That alone was unusual. Emily didn't think out loud, she declared. About, I asked. About us, about the lake house. Maybe I came on too strong. I was excited, you know. I didn't mean to make you feel pushed out. I leaned back in my chair, the phone pressed loosely to my ear. Go on. I've been talking to a new contractor, she continued, and we could work something out. Keep the porch, update the kitchen, make it a place we both use. You could even spend more time up there than me if you want. It was an appealing picture, the idea of sharing, of seeing the place alive, instead of locked in a stalemate. But it was also exactly the kind of compromise Emily had never offered before. What's the catch? I asked. No catch, she said quickly. Too quickly. I don't want this to ruin things between us. I let the silence stretch, waiting. That's when she slipped. If we could just remove that life estate thing, it would make everything so much easier for resale later, she said lightly, as if she hadn't just exposed her real goal. There it was, the truth. I smiled faintly, though she couldn't see it. So that's what this is about. Her voice tightened. No, it's about us. But you have to admit, Dad, tying up the property like this isn't practical. It's sentimental. Sentiment, I said slowly, is the only reason that house still matters at all. She sighed, and for a moment I thought I heard something like genuine regret. I just thought maybe we could start over. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to think my daughter was reaching across the gap we'd built between us. But the other part, the part that had been on the receiving end of her calculated moves, knew better. Emily, I said, you started this game. I'm just playing by the rules you set. Her pause told me she understood the conversation was over. I'll see you around, she said, her voice cooled back to steel. When I hung up, I stared at the phone for a long time. For a brief moment, I'd almost believed her. Almost. But I knew better. The false hope was gone, and all that was left was the final move. A week later, I got a call from my neighbor up at the lake. Sam, you might want to come up here, he said in a low voice. There's a moving truck in your driveway. Looks like they're unloading materials. I was out the door in 5 minutes. The drive felt longer than usual, my hands gripping the wheel tighter with every mile. When I turned onto the gravel drive, there it was, a bright white truck, its ramp down, and 2 men hauling boxes stamped Kitchen and Bath Supply Co. The front door stood wide open. Emily was inside. She didn't even look surprised to see me. Dad, perfect timing, she said, as if we'd scheduled this. I decided to get a head start on the renovations. We'll work around your occupancy. My occupancy, I repeated. Legally, you can live here. But legally, I can still upgrade my property. Her smile was tight, almost triumphant. So I'm doing it now. It hit me. She wasn't trying to remove me anymore. She was trying to make me want to leave. Renovations that would strip away every trace of Claire, every trace of the home we'd built, until it was unrecognizable.
You're making a mistake,
I said quietly. I'm making an investment, she shot back, and I don't need your approval. I walked past her into the kitchen. Half the cabinets were already off the walls, stacked in a corner like discarded furniture from someone else's life. The porch door stood propped open, cold air seeping in as workers measured the railings. She was poisoning the well. That's when I remembered something Claire had told me years ago, when we first drew up the life estate. If they ever try to make it unlivable for you, Sam, you have the right to halt any alterations. Emily hadn't read that part. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed the county recorder's office. The clerk who'd filed my deed answered. I explained the situation, reading the relevant clause aloud from the certified copy I carried in my wallet. Sir, he said, you're within your rights to request an immediate stop to any structural changes. I can email you the form right now. Emily's smile faltered when she saw me filling out the form at the kitchen table. What are you doing? Just protecting my property rights, I said, signing my name with deliberate strokes. Renovations are over. Within the hour, the contractor was loading his tools back into the truck, muttering about legal complications. Emily stood by the door, her arms crossed, fury radiating off her. This isn't over, she said again. You're right, I replied. It's not. Because now, the fight wasn't just about keeping the house. It was about showing her that every move she made, I was already prepared for. And she was running out of moves. Have you ever been in a fight where every step the other person takes only pushes them deeper into their own trap? That's exactly where Emily was now. She thought she could box me in with renovations, legal loopholes, and pressure, but every move she made was a move I'd already prepared for, thanks to Claire, and thanks to the years I'd spent watching my daughter play the long game. We were past the point of pretending this was about family. This was about control. And in this game, the one thing Emily didn't see coming was just how far I was willing to go to keep what mattered. The next move would be public, very public. It happened 2 weeks later at the town council meeting. Emily didn't know I'd be there. She'd petitioned to have the lake house listed as a short-term rental property, which meant presenting her renovation plans in front of the council. The meeting was open to the public, and half the town had turned up contractors, neighbors, even a few curious strangers. I slipped into the back row just as Emily stepped up to the microphone. She was polished as ever. Hair perfect, blazer sharp, voice smooth as glass. My proposal will not only modernize an underused property, she said, but also bring valuable tourism revenue to our community. Applause rippled through the crowd. She smiled, confident. The council chair nodded. Any questions or objections before we move to a vote? I stood. Yes, I have an objection. Every head turned. Emily froze. The smile still plastered on her face, but her eyes sharp with sudden recognition. Dad, she said, her voice dripping with forced politeness, what are you doing here? Just making sure the council has all the relevant information, I replied, walking toward the front. My boots echoed against the tile. I handed the chair a folder. This is a certified copy of a recorded life estate deed on the property in question. It grants me full and exclusive occupancy rights until my death. No alterations, no commercial use without my consent. A murmur spread through the room. Emily's composure cracked for the first time. That's not relevant, she said quickly. I own the property. You own the title, I cut in, but you don't own the right to do what you're proposing, and the law makes that very clear. The chair flipped through the papers, frowning. Miss Carson, is this accurate? Emily's jaw tightened. It's a technicality. It's binding, I corrected, and it was filed before she ever took ownership, which means every dollar she spent planning these renovations is wasted. Gasps broke out in the audience. A few people even chuckled quietly. Emily turned to me, her voice low, but the microphone still catching every word. You're humiliating me. No, I said evenly. I'm telling the truth. You just don't like how it sounds when other people hear it. The chair cleared his throat. Given this information, the council cannot approve the petition. The property's legal status makes the proposed changes impossible without the consent of both parties. He looked at me, and one party clearly does not consent. The vote was never taken. Emily gathered her papers in stiff, jerky movements. She avoided looking at the crowd as she stepped down from the podium, her heels clicking a little too hard against the floor. I stayed seated, letting her walk past me without a word. The room was still buzzing with whispers, the kind that spread quickly in a small town. This was only part one of the plan, the part she could see. The rest was still to come. Emily didn't leave the building right away. Zaled Belfenaf. She stood just outside the council chamber, phone in hand, furiously texting someone, probably her lawyer. I lingered in the hallway, talking casually with a few locals who had been at the meeting. Word travels fast in a small town. By the time I stepped outside, there was already a cluster of people gathered on the sidewalk. Some offered polite nods. Others, the ones who knew Claire and me from way back, gave approving smiles. Emily was pacing near the corner, her voice sharp as she spoke into the phone. No, he can't do this. There has to be a loophole. Well, find one. She turned just enough to see me and ended the call abruptly. Congratulations, she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. You embarrassed your own daughter in front of half the town. I met her glare without flinching. I didn't embarrass you, Emily. You did that yourself when you tried to bulldoze over me. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Do you have any idea how much money I've already put into this project? Thousands in deposits, weeks of work. And not 1 minute of that was spent asking me what I thought, I said. You made your move, Emily. I made mine. A couple of council members exited the building, their eyes flicking between us. Emily must have realized the audience we had, because she suddenly straightened, adopting a calm, measured tone. Maybe we should go somewhere private and talk this through, she said, forcing a smile. I think we're past that, I replied. The public record is clear. The council heard it, and the rest of the town will hear it before the day's over. Her lips pressed into a thin line. You're doing this out of spite. No, I said quietly. I'm doing it because you thought you could erase me from something I've spent my whole life protecting. This isn't spite, it's boundaries. For a moment, I thought she might lash out again, but instead she turned abruptly and walked away, her heels clacking on the pavement until she disappeared around the corner. I stayed where I was, letting the crisp winter air fill my lungs. People were still talking nearby, voices low but unmistakably curious. I could almost hear the questions forming. Did you hear about what happened with Sam Carson's daughter? Did you know about that deed? Exactly the kind of conversation Emily hated. The kind where she wasn't in control of the narrative. The fight in the council chamber had been the public blow, but the real victory was happening now, in the slow erosion of her carefully crafted image. And that was just the beginning of what I had planned. The morning after the council meeting, I drove back up to the lake house. Frost clung to the windows, and the air had that still, heavy quiet that only comes before snow. I unlocked the front door, half expecting Emily to have changed the locks out of spite. But she hadn't been back. The envelope with the certified deed was still on the counter where I'd left it, now joined by a small stack of unopened mail addressed to her. I didn't touch it. That was her business. What was left of it? I walked through the room slowly, letting my hand trail over the familiar textures, the rough grain of the banister, the worn smoothness of the kitchen table, the faint scent of cedar that lingered in the hall closet. Claire's presence was everywhere, quiet but steady, like she was walking the house with me. Emily's plans had been ambitious, but her deposits and contractor schedules were now useless. Word of the council meeting had spread faster than I could have imagined. By the time I stopped for coffee in town, 2 different people had already asked me with knowing smiles if I'd heard the news about that petition. In a community like this, perception is everything. Emily's image as the smart, decisive businesswoman had taken a hit she wouldn't easily recover from, and every day she didn't act only deepened the impression that she'd been outplayed. That afternoon I called my attorney, not to start a new fight, but to close the door on any future ones. We updated the deed, adding a clause that required my written consent for any property-related legal action, a safeguard on top of a safeguard. Once this is filed, my attorney said, she can't touch it without you, period. It wasn't about cruelty, it was about certainty. I wanted to be sure that when I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee next summer, I wouldn't be wondering if a contractor's truck was about to pull into the drive. 2 days later, Emily called. Her voice was flat, all the performative sweetness gone. You win, she said. This was never about winning, I replied. It was about respect. She didn't respond, just hung up. I knew our relationship would never be the same. There was no ribbon to tie around this, no moment where we'd hug it out and go back to the way things were. But there was also no more uncertainty. The house was safe. Claire's memory was safe. That evening, I sat on the porch, the lake a sheet of silver under the moonlight. I thought about the long road that had brought me here. The will reading, the late-night doubts, the careful, deliberate moves. And I realized something. This wasn't just about keeping a house. It was about keeping my place in my own story. And that no one could take from me. Winter settled over the lake like a thick quilt. The water froze early that year, smooth as glass under the pale sun. I spent the mornings splitting firewood, the afternoons fixing small things around the house. Squeaky hinges, a loose floorboard in the upstairs hall, the screen door that had never quite closed right. Every creak and smell brought back memories of Claire. But instead of feeling like wounds, they felt like anchors. The house wasn't a monument to loss anymore. It was alive again. And so was I. I started inviting neighbors over for coffee on the porch. Old friends who'd known our family for decades. People who could tell a dozen stories about the summer of '85, or the time the dock nearly floated away in a storm. We laughed more than I expected. The local kids started stopping by too. I let them borrow the old fishing rods from the shed, and I even took a few of them out on the boat. The hidden compartment under the seats still held the original bundle of documents. Though now that wasn't about protection. It was about remembering that preparation had saved me. By spring, I'd started a new project, restoring the boathouse. It had been sagging for years, but I decided it was worth the work. Some neighbors offered to help, and together we patched the roof, sanded the beams, and painted the trim white again. It felt good to build something instead of just defending it. Emily didn't visit. She didn't call either, except once to ask about a piece of furniture she'd left in storage. We kept it polite, neutral. I didn't press. Some bridges can't be rebuilt, at least not right away. Still, I noticed small changes in myself. I wasn't waiting for the next blow to fall. I wasn't checking the driveway every time a truck passed by. I could sleep without that tight feeling in my chest. One afternoon, while clearing out the attic, I found a box labeled in Claire's handwriting, "For Sam when it's time." Inside were old photos, a worn flannel shirt, and a letter. It was short, just a few lines. "You've always been the one who stayed steady, even when everything else moved. Don't let anyone take that from you. The house is just a house, but it's also a promise. Keep it." I read it 3 times, sitting cross-legged on the attic floor, and I realized that the fight with Emily, as messy and painful as it had been, had also done something I hadn't expected. It had reminded me who I was. I wasn't just the man who'd been left out of a will. I wasn't the father blindsided by his own child's ambition. I was someone who could take a hit, stand back up, and hold his ground without losing himself. By summer, the lake house looked much the same as it always had. Weathered, comfortable, welcoming. But to me, it felt entirely new. Every nail, every board, every quiet morning coffee on the porch was proof that I hadn't just kept the place, I'd kept my dignity. And maybe, one day, Emily would see that. Some battles aren't about winning or losing. They're about making sure you're not erased. The lake house wasn't just wood and stone. It was history. It was family. It was proof that I had a place in a world my own daughter thought she could take from me. If you've ever been pushed to the edge, you know the feeling. That moment when you decide enough is enough. And when you choose to fight, not out of spite, but out of self-respect, that's when you truly win. So tell me, if someone tried to take everything you'd built, would you walk away quietly, or would you make sure they never forgot who they were dealing with?